The Valtharian Empire had conquered 17 star systems without losing a single battle. Their massive dreadnoughts cast shadows across entire moons, and their warriors stood 9 feet tall with chitinous armor that could deflect plasma fire. For 3 centuries, they had swept through the galaxy like an unstoppable tide of destruction, claiming worlds and enslaving species with methodical precision. Commander Zelthak stood on the bridge of the flagship Doom's Herald, his forearms crossed as he gazed at the blue marble floating in the void ahead. Earth. Such a small, insignificant world, yet it had somehow managed to resist their initial diplomatic demands for surrender. The humans had actually sent back a message saying they would consider the proposal and asked for more time. Foolish creatures, Zelthak muttered, his mandibles clicking with amusement. They think they can negotiate with the Empire. His second-in-command, Captain Vrex, approached with the latest intelligence reports. The holographic display showed Earth's primitive defenses. A handful of orbital stations, some outdated missile systems, and a small fleet of ships that looked like toys compared to Valtharian vessels. The humans had barely achieved faster-than-light travel 50 years ago, while the Empire had been perfecting interstellar warfare for millennia. Sir, our scouts report that the humans have gathered their leaders for some sort of conference, Vrex reported. They appear to be discussing terms of surrender. Zelthak's laugh rumbled through the bridge like thunder. Of course they are. No species has ever been foolish enough to actually fight us once they see our fleet. He gestured toward the view screen where hundreds of Valtharian warships hung in perfect formation. Each vessel was the size of a human city, bristling with weapons that could crack continents. The intelligence reports painted a picture of a species that was laughably unprepared for galactic warfare. Humans still used chemical propulsion for many of their ships. Their weapons were crude energy projectors, and they had no experience fighting enemies who possessed technology centuries beyond their own. Most amusing of all, they seemed to spend as much time fighting each other as they did preparing for external threats. What of their military capabilities? Zelthak asked, though he expected the answer to be disappointing. Minimal, sir. They have approximately 2,000 combat vessels, most of which are outdated patrol craft. Their largest ships carry primitive nuclear weapons that would barely scratch our hull plating. Intelligence suggests their entire military could be neutralized within the first hour of engagement. Zelthak nodded with satisfaction. This would be another easy conquest to add to the Empire's growing list of victories. The humans would surrender, their world would be claimed, and their population would join the millions of other species serving the Empire as laborers and resource gatherers. What the Valtharian intelligence network had failed to understand was the true nature of humanity. Their reports focused on military hardware and governmental structures, but they had missed something far more important: the fierce protective instinct that drove humans to extraordinary acts when their young were threatened. The Empire's standard protocol was efficient and terrifying. They would demand surrender, and if refused, they would demonstrate their power by destroying a single population center. Usually this was enough to break any species' will to resist. The psychological impact of watching helpless civilians die while their military proved utterly powerless was devastating. Most civilizations capitulated immediately after such a demonstration. Prepare the demonstration strike, Zelthak commanded. Select a moderately populated settlement, something large enough to be meaningful but small enough that the humans won't consider it a total war declaration. We want them terrified, not suicidal. The targeting systems identified a perfect candidate, a small city called Riverside, population 43,000. It had a university, some light industry, and enough civilians to make the point clear without seeming like an act of genocide. The Valtharians had used this tactic successfully on dozens of worlds. What they didn't know was that Riverside Elementary School was hosting its annual science fair that day. 300 children between the ages of 6 and 12 had gathered to display their projects, their parents and teachers proudly watching as young minds explored the wonders of the universe. Among them was 8-year-old Sarah Chen, who had built a working model of a faster-than-light communication device based on theoretical papers she had somehow managed to understand. The Valtharian plasma cannon charged for 30 seconds, building up enough energy to reduce the entire city to molten glass. The beam lanced down from orbit with surgical precision, turning 43,000 human lives into ash in the span of 3 seconds. The Empire's sensors recorded the destruction with clinical detachment, noting the complete vaporization of all structures and life forms in the target zone. Demonstration complete, sir, Frex reported. No survivors detected. The humans should receive our message within the hour. Zeltak smiled with predatory satisfaction. Excellent. Begin broadcasting our surrender terms on all human communication channels. They have 12 hours to respond, or we'll select the next target. The message was broadcast across Earth's networks with typical Valtharian arrogance. Primitive humans, you have witnessed the price of defiance. The Valtharian Empire offers you one opportunity to surrender your world and accept imperial rule. You have 12 hours to respond. Failure to comply will result in the destruction of additional population centers until you submit. What followed was 12 hours of silence from the human government. No response came through official channels. The Valtharian fleet waited with growing impatience as the deadline approached and passed without word from Earth. Zeltak was puzzled by the lack of response. Usually, species begged for mercy within minutes of the demonstration strike. The continued silence was unprecedented in Imperial history. Had the humans not understood the message? Were they too primitive to comprehend their situation? Sir, Vrex said hesitantly, our long-range sensors are detecting unusual activity throughout the human star system. Their ships are moving into new formations and there's increased energy output from their industrial worlds. Impossible, Zeltak replied. No species has ever chosen to fight after a demonstration strike. They must be preparing to surrender en masse. Continue monitoring, but prepare for the next phase of subjugation. But the humans weren't preparing to surrender. Deep in underground bunkers and hidden facilities across their worlds, something else was happening. The death of those children in Riverside had awakened something primal in the human species, something the Valtharians had never encountered in their centuries of conquest. For the first time in Imperial history, a species had responded to their demonstration of power not with fear, but with cold, calculating rage. The humans were indeed preparing, but not for surrender. They were preparing for war. Admiral Rebecca Martinez stood in the Emergency Command Center, buried 3 miles beneath the Colorado mountains. The massive screens around her displayed tactical information from across the solar system, but her eyes kept returning to the crater where Riverside once stood. Satellite imagery showed nothing but a perfect circle of molten glass where 43,000 people had lived and breathed just hours before. Among the dead were her own niece and nephew, visiting their grandmother for the science fair, 7-year-old Miguel, who wanted to be an astronaut, and his sister Carmen, who collected rocks and called them her space treasures. Their dreams, their laughter, their future contributions to humanity had been erased in 3 seconds by aliens who saw them as nothing more than statistics in a demonstration of power. Admiral, her aide Colonel Harrison approached carefully. We've received responses from all member nations. The vote was unanimous. Martinez nodded without taking her eyes off the screens. Every major power on Earth had reached the same conclusion within hours of the attack. The aliens had made their greatest miscalculation in 3 centuries of conquest. They had killed human children and expected submission in return. What's our current military status? She asked. All fleets are moving to assigned positions. The Mars defense grid is fully operational, and the asteroid mining stations have been converted to weapons platforms. We've also received word from the Luna colonies. They're ready to implement Protocol 7 if necessary. Protocol 7. Martinez had helped design it 20 years ago, back when humanity's greatest fear was an invasion by hostile aliens. The protocol called for the complete mobilization of human civilization's industrial capacity, the weaponization of every available resource, and the systematic elimination of any threat to human children. It had never been tested because no one had ever been stupid enough to murder human children and expect mercy in return. The aliens' intelligence network had failed them catastrophically. They had cataloged human military assets and governmental structures, but they had completely missed humanity's most dangerous characteristic, their willingness to sacrifice everything to protect their young. Human parents had thrown themselves into volcanoes to save their children, had fought off predators with their bare hands, had worked themselves to death to provide better lives for the next generation. The Valtharians had just declared war on the most protective species in the galaxy. Sir, we're receiving reports from intelligence assets throughout the system, Colonel Harrison continued. The alien fleet appears to be maintaining standard formation. They're not taking any additional defensive measures. Of course they weren't. In their experience, demonstration strikes were followed by immediate surrender. They had no reason to suspect that humans might respond differently to the slaughter of their children. Dr. Sarah Kim, the head of Earth's Experimental Weapons Division, burst into the command center with barely contained excitement. "Admiral, I need to show you something. We've been analyzing the alien weapon signatures from the attack." She activated a holographic display showing the energy patterns from the plasma bombardment. Their weapons are incredibly powerful, but they're also incredibly inefficient. They're using a brute force approach, overwhelming firepower with no regard for energy conservation. "We think it's because they've never faced serious resistance." Martinez studied the patterns. "What are you suggesting, Doctor?" "I'm suggesting that we might have an advantage they don't expect. Our weapons may be primitive compared to theirs, but we've designed them to fight against opponents with similar technology. We've had to be clever, efficient, and resourceful. They've just had to be overwhelming." The implications were staggering. Humanity had spent centuries perfecting the art of war against equally matched opponents. Every weapon system, every tactical doctrine, every strategic principle had been forged in conflicts where victory went to the most innovative and adaptable force. The aliens, by contrast, had become accustomed to steamrolling primitive civilizations through raw technological superiority. "There's more," Dr. Kim continued. "We've detected significant vulnerabilities in their ship designs. Their armor is incredibly strong against energy weapons, but it's designed to deflect rather than absorb. If we can find ways to redirect their own firepower..." The tactical possibilities were intriguing, but Martinez knew that conventional warfare alone wouldn't be enough. The aliens had hundreds of massive ships, each capable of destroying entire cities. Humanity needed something more than clever tactics and efficient weapons. They needed the kind of desperate innovation that only came from fighting for survival. "What about the industrial mobilization?" she asked. "Ahead of schedule," Harrison replied. "Every asteroid mining operation in the system has been retooled for weapons production. The Jupiter orbital platforms are manufacturing kinetic projectiles around the clock. And the research stations..." He paused, checking his secure tablet. "The research stations are producing some very interesting developments." Martinez had authorized the release of classified technologies that had been deemed too dangerous for peacetime use. Experimental drives that could accelerate ships to unprecedented speeds. Prototype weapons that bordered on war crimes when used against other humans. Artificial intelligence systems that had been restricted due to ethical concerns. The death of those children had removed all ethical constraints from humanity's arsenal. In the outer system, automated factories were consuming entire asteroids to produce weapons of war. The massive industrial complex that humanity had built to harvest resources from space was being converted into the largest weapons manufacturing operation in galactic history. Every transport ship was being retrofitted with military systems. Every civilian vessel was being equipped with weapons and armor. But the most significant changes were happening in the hearts and minds of humanity itself. The images from Riverside had been broadcast across every human world, every station, every ship. 8-year-old Sarah Chen's science project had survived the plasma bombardment, protected by a quirk of physics in her makeshift laboratory. The twisted remains of her faster-than-light communicator had become a symbol of innocence destroyed and potential erased. Volunteer rates for military service had increased by 3,000% in the first 12 hours after the attack. Factories that had produced consumer goods were retooling themselves for military production without waiting for government orders. Scientists were abandoning their research projects to work on weapons development. Artists were creating propaganda that turned the alien attack into a rallying cry for species survival. "Admiral," her communications officer called out, "we're receiving a priority transmission from Fleet Command. Admiral Chen wants to speak with you immediately." Admiral Marcus Chen appeared on the main screen, his usually calm demeanor replaced by barely controlled fury. Behind him, Martinez could see the bridge of the UES Retribution, humanity's newest and most powerful warship. "Rebecca," he said without preamble, "I'm moving my battle group to intercept position. We've completed the modifications to our kinetic weapon systems, and the new targeting computers are online. How long until the civilian evacuation is complete?" "Another 6 hours for the orbital platforms," Martinez replied. "The planetary evacuations will take longer." "We may not have longer," Chen warned. Our sensors are detecting movement in their fleet. They may be preparing for additional demonstration strikes. The thought of more human children dying in alien plasma fire sent a wave of cold rage through Martinez. The Valtharians thought they were dealing with a typical primitive species that could be broken through terror. They had no idea that they had just signed their own death warrant. Marcus, how many ships do you have in position? 47 combat vessels plus about 200 retrofitted civilian ships. Not much against their numbers, but we've got some surprises prepared. Martinez smiled grimly. The aliens expected humanity to surrender or die trying to defend themselves with primitive weapons. They had no idea that they were about to face an enemy that had turned their entire civilization into a weapon of revenge. The Valtharian Empire had claimed to be unstoppable. They were about to learn what happened when an unstoppable force met humanity's immovable determination to protect their children. Commander Zeltak was growing impatient. 24 hours had passed since the demonstration strike and still no surrender from the humans. Even more puzzling, their primitive ships continued to move throughout the system in increasingly organized patterns. Long-range sensors showed massive energy spikes from their industrial facilities, as if they were ramping up production rather than preparing for capitulation. "This is unprecedented," Captain Vrex muttered, studying the tactical displays. "No species has ever maintained military operations after a demonstration strike. They should be begging for mercy by now." Zeltak's forearms flexed in annoyance. The delay was making him look weak in front of his officers. The Empire's reputation was built on swift, decisive victories. The longer this dragged on, the more other species might begin to question Valtharian invincibility. Perhaps their communication systems are too primitive to coordinate a planetary surrender, suggested the ship's intelligence officer. "We may need to destroy another city to clarify our position." The targeting computers had already selected the next demonstration target, New Geneva, home to Earth's primary diplomatic complex and nearly 2 million inhabitants. The destruction would be visible from half the planet and would eliminate any doubt about Valtharian capabilities. But as the weapons charged for the second strike, something unprecedented happened. The human ships that had been scattered across the system suddenly accelerated toward the Valtharian fleet. Not retreating, not seeking defensive positions, but attacking. "Impossible," Zeltak breathed. "They can't be serious." The first wave consisted of about 50 human vessels, laughably small compared to the massive Valtharian dreadnoughts. Their weapons were chemical rockets and primitive energy projectors that would barely scratch Imperial armor. It was such a hopeless gesture that several Valtharian officers actually laughed out loud. "Shall we destroy them, sir?" the weapons officer asked casually. "Wait," Zeltak commanded. He wanted to see what these suicidal humans thought they could accomplish. Perhaps their desperation would provide entertainment for his crew before the inevitable surrender. The human ships spread into attack formation with surprising coordination. Their movements were precise, disciplined, and showed tactical knowledge that the intelligence reports had not prepared him for. Still, it hardly mattered. The smallest Valtharian escort vessel could obliterate the entire human attack force. But then the humans did something that defied all military logic. Instead of targeting the Valtharian weapons or shields, they aimed for completely different sections of the ships. They were firing at what appeared to be random hull segments with pinpoint accuracy. "What are they targeting?" Vrex asked in confusion. Before anyone could answer, the first human volley struck home. The chemical explosives and primitive lasers did exactly what Zeltak expected. They bounced harmlessly off the Imperial armor without causing any significant damage. The Valtharian crew began to relax, ready to watch the humans exhaust their ammunition in futile attacks. Then the second volley hit, and everything changed. The humans weren't trying to penetrate the armor with their weapons. They were using their weapons to create precise fracture points in the hull plating. The first volley had weakened specific sections, and the second volley was designed to exploit those weaknesses through resonance frequencies that matched the natural harmonic of Valtharian hull metal. Dr. Sarah Kim's analysis had been correct. The alien armor was incredibly strong, but had never been tested against coordinated precision attacks designed to exploit its structural weaknesses. Like a master sculptor finding the exact point to split a stone with a single hammer blow, the humans had found the precise way to turn the aliens' own armor into a liability. Massive hull sections began peeling away from 3 Valtharian ships as the resonance cascaded through their superstructure. What should have been minor damage became catastrophic structural failure, as the carefully calculated human attacks turned the ship's own armor into a weapon against them. Impossible, Zeltak roared. Our armor is impenetrable. Sir, we're losing structural integrity on the Devastation and Conqueror, his engineering officer reported in shock. The humans somehow found a way to use resonance harmonics against our hull composition, but the humans weren't finished. As the first wave of attacks created chaos in the Valtharian formation, a second wave of human ships appeared from behind the cover of a small asteroid. These vessels were different, larger, heavily modified, and moving at speeds that should have been impossible for human technology. Where did those ships come from? Rex demanded. The answer came in the form of devastating kinetic strikes that hit the damaged Valtharian vessels with the force of small meteors. But these weren't random projectiles. They were precisely targeted packages that struck the exact points where the resonance attacks had weakened the hull structure. The Devastation, a dreadnought that had conquered star systems, split in half like a broken toy. The Conqueror, veteran of a dozen campaigns, simply disintegrated as its structural integrity completely collapsed. In less than 5 minutes, the humans had destroyed 2 of the Empire's most powerful warships, using weapons that shouldn't have been capable of scratching their paint. How is this possible? Zeltak whispered. His intelligence officer was frantically running calculations on his console. Sir, the humans appear to have analyzed our weapon signatures from the demonstration strike. They've reverse-engineered our hull composition and found a way to exploit microscopic flaws in our armor matrix. The implications were staggering. No species had ever been clever enough to turn a demonstration strike into intelligence gathering. The Valtharians had unknowingly provided the humans with all the information they needed to find weaknesses in Imperial technology. But the worst was yet to come. As the Valtharian fleet scrambled to respond to this impossible development, long-range sensors detected massive energy signatures throughout the human system. The industrial facilities that had been ramping up production weren't building conventional weapons. They were constructing something far more dangerous. Sir, multiple launch signatures detected from the asteroid belt, the sensor officer reported. Thousands of objects accelerating toward our position. The tactical display lit up with tracking indicators as a swarm of projectiles streaked across space toward the Valtharian fleet. These weren't the primitive missiles the intelligence reports had described. They were sophisticated kinetic weapons with advanced guidance systems and adaptive targeting protocols. Deploy countermeasures, Zeltak commanded. The Valtharian point defense systems activated, filling space with energy beams designed to intercept incoming missiles. But the human projectiles didn't behave like normal weapons. They scattered and regrouped, used the debris from the destroyed ships as cover, and employed electronic warfare techniques that seemed impossibly advanced for a species that had only recently achieved interstellar flight. More critically, each projectile seemed to know exactly where to hit each Valtharian ship for maximum effect. The humans had somehow mapped the structural weaknesses of every vessel in the fleet and programmed their weapons accordingly. The subjugator took 7 kinetic hits in rapid succession, each one striking a different critical system. The annihilator simply vanished in a ball of fire as a human projectile somehow found its way into the ship's primary reactor core. Sir, we've lost contact with 6 ships, Rex reported in disbelief. The humans they're actually winning. Zeltak stared at the tactical display in shock. In 30 minutes of combat, the human primitives had destroyed or disabled nearly a quarter of his fleet using weapons that should have been completely ineffective. More human ships were arriving from across the system, and the asteroid belt was launching new waves of kinetic projectiles. For the first time in 3 centuries of conquest, the Valtharian Empire was facing an enemy that had turned their own technological superiority against them. The humans hadn't tried to match Imperial firepower. They had simply found better ways to use what they had. And judging by the continuing stream of launches from human industrial facilities, they were just getting started. The species that had been dismissed as primitive and helpless was systematically dismantling the most powerful fleet in galactic history. The Valtharians had wanted to demonstrate their power to humanity. Instead, they had taught humanity how to kill them. Admiral Marcus Chen watched from the bridge of the Retribution as another Valtharian dreadnought broke apart under concentrated kinetic bombardment. The alien ship had survived for 300 years of galactic conquest, but it couldn't survive 10 minutes against human ingenuity driven by parental rage. Target destroyed, his weapons officer reported with grim satisfaction. That's the 8th capital ship down. Good, Chen replied coldly. How many more until we've avenged every child they murdered in Riverside? The mathematics were simple but terrible. 43,000 people had died in the demonstration strike, including 300 children. At the current rate of Valtharian casualties, they would need to destroy approximately 50 more ships to achieve equal losses. But Chen wasn't interested in equal losses. He wanted overwhelming retribution. The battle had been raging for 6 hours and the impossible had become routine. Human ships that should have been obliterated by the first alien volley were dancing between massive plasma beams like fighters avoiding searchlights. Human weapons that should have been useless against Imperial armor were systematically dismantling ships that had conquered star systems. The key had been Dr. Kim's breakthrough about Valtharian technology. The aliens had never needed to innovate because they had never faced serious resistance. Their weapons were powerful but predictable. Their armor was strong but inflexible. And their tactics were based on overwhelming force rather than adaptive strategy. Humanity, by contrast, had spent millennia fighting opponents who could adapt and innovate. Every human weapon system included multiple backup modes. Every ship could be rapidly reconfigured for different roles, and every tactical doctrine emphasized flexibility over raw power. When faced with superior technology, humans didn't try to match it. They found ways around it. Admiral, his communications officer called out. Priority message from Admiral Martinez on Earth. They're ready to implement Phase 2. Chen smiled grimly. Phase 1 had been the initial attacks designed to test Valtharian capabilities and identify weaknesses. Phase 2 was something far more ambitious and far more dangerous. Signal all human forces, Chen commanded. Execute Phase 2. Let's show these aliens what happens when they threaten human children. Throughout the solar system, massive industrial platforms that had been rapidly converted to weapons production began revealing their true purpose. They hadn't just been building kinetic projectiles and missile swarms, they had been constructing something unprecedented in galactic warfare. The first sign was a subtle shift in local spacetime as artificial gravity. Generators far more powerful than anything humans should have possessed began, operating in perfect coordination. The Valtharians had dismissed human technology as primitive, but they had failed to account for human creativity when properly motivated. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the chief physicist on the Mars research station, had been working on theoretical gravitational manipulation for 20 years. Her research had been purely academic until the attack on Riverside, when the restrictions on dangerous research had been lifted. In 6 days, she had turned her theoretical gravity projectors into the most devastating weapons in human history. The Valtharian fleet suddenly found itself caught in gravitational anomalies that shouldn't have been possible. Ships that had been maintaining perfect formation were pulled off course as localized gravity wells appeared around them. Plasma beams that should have traveled in straight lines were bent and twisted until they missed their targets entirely. What's happening to our navigation systems? Commander Zeltak demanded as his flagship lurched violently to starboard. Sir, we're detecting massive gravitational distortions throughout the battle space, his science officer reported in confusion. The humans appear to have deployed some kind of gravity manipulation technology. Impossible, Zeltak roared. Gravitational weapons require technology centuries beyond their capabilities. But the evidence was undeniable. The humans had somehow learned to bend space-time itself into a weapon. Valtharian ships found themselves unable to maneuver properly, as their own engines worked against artificial gravity fields. More critically, their targeting systems became useless as human ships used gravity manipulation to appear in multiple locations simultaneously. The Retribution seemed to be in 6 places at once as gravitational lensing bent light around it. Valtharian gunners found themselves shooting at phantoms while the real ship attacked from unexpected angles. Human vessels that should have been easy targets became impossible to track as they surfed gravitational currents like ships riding ocean waves. But Phase 2 involved more than exotic physics. Hidden throughout the asteroid belt, automated factories had been producing something that defied every rule of civilized warfare. The humans had taken their most dangerous theoretical weapons and made them real. The first Antimatter torpedo struck the Valtharian flagship's secondary hull and released the energy equivalent of a small star. The explosion was visible from Earth's moon, and the shockwave damaged ships tens of thousands of kilometers away. The mighty Doom's Herald, which had led the conquest of 17 star systems, simply ceased to exist. "Impossible," whispered Captain Vrex, now the senior surviving officer in the Valtharian fleet. "No species develops antimatter weapons this quickly. It takes centuries of technological development." What the aliens didn't understand was that humans had been theoretically capable of building antimatter weapons for decades. The only thing that had stopped them was the danger of producing and storing such weapons safely. But with their children murdered and their homes threatened, safety had become a secondary concern. Dr. James Park, the head of humanity's antimatter research program, had solved the storage problem through sheer desperation and brilliant improvisation. Instead of trying to safely contain antimatter for long periods, the human weapons produced it on demand using compact particle accelerators built into each torpedo. The weapons were incredibly dangerous to manufacture and deploy, but they only needed to work once. The second wave of antimatter weapons struck the remaining Valtharian capital ships with devastating effect. Each torpedo was targeted precisely, using the structural analysis data gathered during the first phase of combat. The aliens' armor, which had seemed impenetrable, provided no protection against weapons that converted matter directly into energy. In less than an hour, the Valtharian invasion fleet had been reduced from 200 ships to fewer than 30. The survivors were damaged, demoralized, and completely outclassed by an enemy they had dismissed as primitive. "Sir," the communications officer aboard the last surviving Valtharian command ship called out desperately, "we're receiving a transmission from the human fleet." Admiral Chen's face appeared on every surviving alien vessel simultaneously. Behind him, the bridge of the Retribution showed calm professionalism despite the unprecedented battle they had just won. "Valtharian Commander," Chen said with cold formality, "I am Admiral Marcus Chen of the Human Defense Force. You have approximately 30 ships remaining from your invasion fleet. You have one choice: surrender immediately, or we will continue this demonstration until none of you survive." Captain Vrex stared at the human admiral in shock. You cannot threaten the Valtharian Empire. We have conquered 17 star systems. Our reserve fleets will destroy your entire species for this insult." Chen's expression didn't change. "Captain, you killed 43,000 human civilians, including 300 children. That was your first mistake. Your second mistake was assuming we would surrender instead of seeking justice. Your third mistake was believing that your reserve fleets will have time to reach Earth before we complete our retribution." Behind Chen, tactical displays showed something that made Vrex's blood run cold. The human industrial platforms throughout the system were launching new waves of weapons, but these weren't targeting the surviving Valtharian ships. They were aimed at the hyperspace jump points where reinforcing alien fleets would emerge. The humans weren't just winning this battle, they were preparing to destroy every Valtharian ship that dared to enter their system. The species that had been dismissed as helpless primitives had turned their entire civilization into a weapon of revenge. And they were just getting started. The hunt beyond the stars. 3 days after the destruction of the Valtharian invasion fleet, Captain Vrex found himself in an impossible position. His surviving ships were trapped in the human system, surrounded by weapons platforms that could destroy them instantly. But escape seemed equally hopeless. The humans had somehow managed to mine every hyperspace jump point with antimatter devices that would obliterate any ship attempting to leave. The situation defied everything the Valtharian Empire knew about primitive species. Defeated enemies were supposed to celebrate their survival, not prepare for aggressive expansion into galactic space. The humans should have been satisfied with defending their home system, not planning to carry their war to other worlds. Admiral Chen's ultimatum had been simple and terrifying. Surrender completely. Provide detailed intelligence about Valtharian Empire operations, or watch as humanity systematically hunted down every member of their species in the galaxy. The humans weren't interested in negotiation or limited victory. They wanted absolute retribution for the murder of their children. "Sir," Vrex's communications officer reported nervously, "we're receiving another transmission from the human command ship." Admiral Martinez appeared on the main screen, her expression as cold as the void between stars. Behind her, Holographic displays showed star charts extending far beyond the human system, with tactical markers indicating known Valtharian worlds and bases. "Captain Vrex," she began without preamble, "our intelligence teams have finished analyzing the data recovered from your destroyed vessels. We now know the locations of 47 Valtharian colonies, 12 major shipbuilding facilities, and your species' homeworld. You have 1 hour to provide additional intelligence, or we begin Phase 3 of our operations." Vrex felt his mandibles click in nervous fear. The humans had somehow extracted detailed tactical information from ships that had been completely destroyed. Their data recovery capabilities exceeded anything in Valtharian experience, and their interpretation of that data showed a level of strategic thinking that was genuinely frightening. "You cannot be serious," he replied desperately. "No species has ever attempted galactic warfare so soon after achieving interstellar flight. You lack the infrastructure, the experience, the resources." Martinez's smile was sharp as a blade. "Captain, 3 days ago you thought we lacked the capability to defend ourselves against your invasion fleet. Your assessment of human limitations has proven consistently unreliable." The truth was even more disturbing than Vrex realized. Humanity had indeed lacked the infrastructure for galactic warfare 3 days ago. But the industrial mobilization triggered by the attack on Riverside had transformed their entire civilization with unprecedented speed. Every factory, every research facility, every automated system had been retooled for military production on a scale that defied galactic norms. Dr. Sarah Kim had solved the resource problem through brilliant improvisation. The asteroid belt contained enough raw materials to build 1,000 fleets, and the automated mining systems could be rapidly reconfigured to produce military hardware instead of civilian goods. More importantly, the humans had developed manufacturing techniques that prioritized speed and effectiveness over safety margins, a trade-off that would have been unthinkable in peacetime, but was perfectly acceptable when seeking vengeance for murdered children. The first human deep space warships were already launching. From hidden construction facilities throughout the outer system, these vessels bore no resemblance to the defensive craft that had fought the initial battle. They were purpose-built for aggressive warfare, incorporating every lesson learned from the Valtharian technology analysis and designed specifically to hunt down fleeing enemies across interstellar distances. "Captain," Martinez continued, "our long-range sensors have detected 3 Valtharian scout ships attempting to reach the hyperspace jump points. They appear to be carrying messages about your defeat back to your empire. We're curious to see how fast your people can run." Rex's sensor displays confirmed his worst fears. The human ships that had seemed impossibly fast during the initial battle were nothing compared to these new vessels. They moved through space with fluid grace, their exotic propulsion systems bending the normal rules of physics in ways that made Valtharian technology look primitive by comparison. The fleeing Valtharian scouts never had a chance. Human interceptor craft appeared around them like ghosts materializing from hyperspace, using some form of instantaneous travel that shouldn't have existed outside of theoretical physics journals. The alien ships were disabled and captured within minutes, their crews taken prisoner before they could send warning messages to the Empire. "How?" Vrex whispered. "How did you develop faster-than-light travel so quickly?" Martinez's expression remained coldly professional. "Captain, when you murdered our children, you removed every ethical constraint from our research programs. Dr. Elena Vasquez's gravitational manipulation theories have been weaponized in ways that would have been unthinkable before your attack. We can now fold space-time itself to move our ships instantaneously across galactic distances." The implications were staggering. The humans had achieved in days what most species took centuries to develop. Driven by a fury that transcended normal technological limitations, they had turned their entire scientific establishment into a weapon of war. And that weapon was now pointed at every Valtharian world in the galaxy. "Phase 3 is simple," Martinez explained. "Our deep space fleets will visit every Valtharian colony, every military base, every world that has benefited from your empire's conquest of other species. We will offer each population the same choice you offered us: surrender completely, or face the consequences of resistance." The tactical displays behind her showed the deployment of human battle groups across known Valtharian space. Each group was small but devastatingly effective, equipped with weapons and technologies that shouldn't have existed. They weren't planning to conquer the Valtharian Empire. They were planning to dismantle it piece by piece until nothing remained. But there's a difference between our ultimatum and yours, Martinez continued. When you demanded our surrender, you had already murdered 43,000 innocent civilians. When we demand yours, we haven't killed a single Valtharian civilian yet. Your people still have the opportunity to choose survival over defiance. Vrex realized with growing horror that the humans weren't planning a conventional war. They were planning systematic elimination of Valtharian military capability, while offering mercy to populations that surrendered. It was a strategy designed to break the Empire's will to resist while minimizing casualties among those who hadn't chosen to participate in the attack on Riverside. Your tactics are honorable, he admitted grudgingly, but the Empire will never surrender to a primitive species. Our reserve fleets will rally and counterattack. You cannot fight the entire galaxy. Martinez's smile returned, colder than before. Captain, we're not fighting the entire galaxy. We're fighting the species that murdered human children and expected us to submit. The rest of the galaxy is watching to see what happens when someone threatens humanity's young. The truth was even more complex than Vrex understood. Human diplomatic missions had already made contact with dozens of species that had been conquered or threatened by the Valtharian Empire. The news of humanity's victory over the invincible alien fleet was spreading through galactic civilization like wildfire, inspiring hope in species that had lived in fear for centuries. More critically, humanity's demonstration of advanced technology was attracting attention from the galaxy's most powerful civilizations, species that had remained neutral and galactic. Conflicts were suddenly very interested in establishing diplomatic relationships with the remarkable newcomers who had turned theoretical physics into practical weapons in less than a week. Captain Vrex, Martinez said finally, you have 30 minutes to decide. Surrender your remaining ships and provide complete intelligence about Valtharian operations, or watch as we demonstrate what happens when an unstoppable force meets humanity's immovable determination to protect our children. Choose wisely. Your species' survival may depend on it. The transmission ended, leaving Vrex alone with an impossible decision. Surrender would mean the end of Valtharian military supremacy and the collapse of an empire that had dominated the galaxy for 3 centuries. But resistance would mean facing an enemy that had already proven capable of impossible victories through sheer innovative fury. As he stared at the tactical displays showing human fleets preparing to jump to hyperspace, Vrex realized that the Valtharian Empire's greatest mistake hadn't been underestimating human military capability. Their greatest mistake had been failing to understand that some species would rather burn down the galaxy than allow their children to be murdered without consequence. The humans weren't just seeking victory, they were seeking justice, and they had proven willing to reshape the very foundations of physics to achieve it. 6 months after the attack on Riverside, Captain Vrex stood in the council chambers of the Galactic Federation, a political body that hadn't existed before humanity's emergence as a major power. Around him sat representatives from 43 species, including many that had been enslaved or threatened by the Valtharian Empire for generations. The transformation had been swift and absolute. Faced with humanity's ultimatum, most Valtharian colonies had surrendered without firing a shot. Those few that had chosen to resist had been systematically dismantled by human fleets that seemed to appear and disappear at will, using technologies that redefined the possibilities of warfare. Within 3 months, the mighty Valtharian Empire had been reduced to a handful of protected worlds under human oversight. But the most remarkable change wasn't military, it was diplomatic. Humanity had used their sudden technological superiority not to create a new empire, but to establish a federation of equals dedicated to preventing future genocides. The species that had been ready to burn down the galaxy for revenge had chosen instead to rebuild it according to better principles. Admiral Martinez, now serving as Earth's representative to the Federation Council, stood to address the assembly. Her uniform bore the insignia of humanity's new role as galactic peacekeepers, but her expression still carried the cold determination that had driven their war of retribution. Fellow representatives, she began, 6 months ago, the Valtharian Empire believed they could terrorize any species into submission through the murder of innocents. They chose to demonstrate this belief by destroying a human city and killing 43,000 civilians, including 300 children. The chamber fell silent, Every species present had heard the story, but the raw numbers still carried devastating impact. The idea of deliberately targeting children for military advantage was so abhorrent that it had united previously hostile civilizations in common cause against the Veltharians. The Empire expected humanity to surrender in the face of overwhelming technological superiority, Martinez continued. Instead, they discovered that some species will move mountains, bend the laws of physics, and reshape the galaxy itself rather than allow their children to be murdered without consequences. Breck shifted uncomfortably in his seat. As one of the few surviving Veltharian commanders, he had been granted amnesty in exchange for cooperation with the Federation's reconstruction efforts. The experience of watching his once mighty empire crumble in the face of human determination had been humbling beyond measure. The humans had kept their word about minimizing civilian casualties. Veltharian populations that surrendered were treated with respect and given opportunities to contribute to the new galactic order. But military installations, government centers, and anything connected to the Empire's war machine had been systematically eliminated with ruthless efficiency. Today, Martinez announced, we celebrate the completion of Project Sanctuary, humanity's gift to the galaxy in memory of the children lost at Riverside. The main display activated, showing images from across Federation space, on dozens of worlds that had suffered under Veltharian rule. New facilities were coming online, schools, hospitals, research centers, and cultural institutions designed to nurture young minds and protect growing civilizations. Each facility bore a simple plaque with the names of the 300 children killed in the first demonstration strike, along with the words, "They died so that no child in the galaxy would face the same fate. Their memory is our promise." Dr. Elena Vasquez, now serving as the Federation's chief science advisor, stood to present her latest report. The gravitational manipulation technology developed during the crisis has opened unprecedented possibilities for peaceful development. We can now terraform worlds in decades instead of centuries, transport resources across galactic distances instantaneously, and provide every Federation member with access to advanced technologies that will improve billions of lives. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. Humanity's weapons of war had become tools of construction and healing. The same gravitational projectors that had disabled Veltharian fleets now moved asteroids to create new worlds. The antimatter production facilities that had built weapons of revenge now powered the energy systems that supported growing civilizations. Representative Kylara of the Zenthan Collective, whose species had been enslaved by the Veltharians for 2 centuries, rose to speak. The humans could have used their technological advantages to create a new empire, to replace Veltharian dominance with their own. Instead, they chose to share their knowledge freely and establish a system based on mutual cooperation and protection. The Zenthan homeworld had been one of the first to benefit from humanity's reconstruction efforts. The massive slave labor facilities built by the Veltharians had been converted into educational centers where young Zenthans could develop their remarkable artistic abilities without fear of oppression. But we must never forget why this transformation became necessary, Kylara continued. The humans didn't develop their advanced technologies through normal research and development. They achieved the impossible because they were driven by grief, rage, and an absolute determination to protect their children. We owe our freedom to 43,000 human deaths. Admiral Chen, now serving as commander of the Federation's Rapid Response Fleet, had been monitoring the discussion from his flagship. His forces represented the galaxy's insurance policy against future genocidal regimes, fast, powerful, and capable of reaching any threatened system within hours. The Federation's charter is simple, he transmitted to the assembly. No species will be permitted to target civilians for military advantage. No government will be allowed to enslave or genocide other populations, and no force in the galaxy will be permitted to threaten children without facing the full fury of the human response. The charter had been tested twice in the past 6 months. Both times, emerging dictatorships had attempted to use terror tactics against civilian populations. Both times, human fleets had appeared seemingly from nowhere to end the conflicts within days. The galaxy was learning that humanity's protection of innocence wasn't limited to their own species. Rex finally stood to address the assembly. As a former enemy, his words carried special weight in discussions about the new galactic order. My people believed that fear was the foundation of stable government, he said quietly. We thought that demonstrating overwhelming power would prevent future conflicts by discouraging resistance. We were wrong on both counts, he gestured toward the human representatives. These people have shown us that true stability comes from justice, not fear. They've demonstrated that protecting innocence is more important than maintaining power, and they've proven that the most dangerous enemy isn't the one with the biggest weapons, it's the one with the strongest motivation. The assembly murmured agreement. Across the galaxy, former enemies were working together on reconstruction projects, scientific research, and cultural exchanges that would have been impossible under the old system of imperial dominance. The Valtharian Empire lasted 3 centuries, Vrex concluded, but it died in 3 seconds when we chose to murder human children. That decision didn't just destroy a city, it awakened a fury that reshaped galactic civilization itself. As the session concluded, Admiral Martinez looked out at the assembled representatives and reflected on the strange path that had brought them all together. 6 months ago, she had been planning the systematic destruction of an entire species in revenge for murdered children. Today, she was helping to build a galaxy where no child would ever face such a fate again. The attack on Riverside had indeed been the Valtharian Empire's greatest mistake. But it had also become the foundation of something unprecedented in galactic history. A civilization based on the protection of innocence, rather than the domination of the weak. The humans had claimed to be seeking revenge. Instead, they had created justice, and across the galaxy, in schools and hospitals and research centers bearing the names of 300 murdered children, young minds of every species were growing up in a universe where their safety was guaranteed by humanity's absolute determination to protect them all.